Sentry mode activated. Target acquired.
Hey there hunters, I'm still working on some Remnant from the Hell mod builds and item showcases. Today is kind of a mix of the two. So today I want to showcase the World's Edge sword specifically, because it is a very versatile weapon and I'm going to be attaching my build here for this demonstration. There are tons of ways to piece together melee builds, especially in the From Hell mod when everything's changed and there's new items, but I'm going to be focusing on my very specific setup, which I'd like to call Terror's Edge. So first let's talk about World's Edge, which is what this entire video is going to be built around. The sword was given at the end of the Subject 2923 DLC and has largely been lackluster through the updates. The main issue with it is that when you charge the swing to throw your wide arcing beam, 90% of the damage was in the beam and only 10% on the sword swing. So if you were close to enemies, you would swing, hit them with your dinky little sword hit for like 100, and then the beam would actually spawn past the enemy and just not hit anything. The beam could also get stuck in a lot of terrain and just disappear without hitting stuff. Overall, it's just not a very good weapon, but here in the From Hell mod, it's undergone a lot of changes. It now shoots a very strong beam that travels through walls and hits multiple times through the wave's lifetime. This means that against larger enemies, it can hit multiple times, while small enemies still typically get hit once or twice. It seems like a small change, but it's literally everything for the weapon, because now you can use this weapon around corners or from cover to tag enemies. And the damage that World's Edge can do now is just insane against some large enemies. Even against small enemies, it's actually extremely effective, especially at crowd control. The weapon does have a few noticeable downsides though. First is that it does take a decent amount of time to actually charge the swing, which does leave you open, especially in swarms of enemies here in the From Hell mod. Second is that the beam does not travel very far, so you do still have to be up in the fray in melee range. It's not like Hero Sword. And obviously melee combat is not something everyone's comfortable with in Remnant. Lastly, this charge swing eats a huge amount of stamina per swing, and you have to manage your stamina very carefully, because if you don't, you will find yourself needing to dodge when you're out of stamina, or trying to use the charge beam without enough stamina to do it, so you'll just swing for nothing. And most likely you're just going to eat a hit in the process. Now, even with these downsides, World's Edge is still tremendously strong, and it's a weapon that you can use through the entire game, even on Hell difficulty. So, sorry that was kind of a long introduction to the weapon, but let's get into the build and kind of what we're doing with it. So the Terror Edge build combines World's Edge with Terror Margin. This amulet is extremely underrated. It provides melee leech and melee damage when you're at full HP. Now what makes this amulet so insane is that statuses applied with a melee weapon count as melee damage. So fire, bleed, hypothermia, overload, and all that stuff from those special weapons will all heal you. We also get bonus damage for all these as well, which is pretty nice. Now you can use this amulet on a lot of weapons and pretty much for any melee build. But I'm going to be focusing on World's Edge and I want to make full use of this amulet. So the two rings we're going to be using are the Razor Stone ring and the new ring Charred Circlet. The Charred Circlet is basically just the fire version of Razor Stone. It applies fire dots on charged melee swings. So when you use a charged attack, now we're going to be applying both bleed and fire dots. And since World's Edge charge attack now hits multiple times as it travels through enemies, it can apply multiple stacks on a single swing. These dots now applied also count as melee damage and give us a large amount of leech back constantly as they're taken away on enemies, thanks to Terror Margin. All these together make for an extremely tanky build capable of withstanding multiple blows even in Hell. Now I did skip over the armor set of choice here because there are so many options to choose from. You can use Warlord's armor and it pairs very well since we're already leeching on top of Warlord's, life leech when you use its ability. You'll be just fine. Or you can use Scrapper armor like I have here. Scrapper armor provides an increase to all damage types within 7.5 meters, so pairing that with shotguns, you can effectively get a bonus damage for everything. And Scrapper also provides you with 15% damage reduction from enemies inside your little effective bubble. It may not sound like a lot, but 15% is really good, especially when you're leeching most of the enemies. Other armor sets you can use are the Twisted set, which I also have here, which provide more damage for melee and mods over the Scrapper armor, and it has natural life regeneration, but it does lack the damage reduction from Scrapper. Osseous, also a great set to use because the ticks from the dots applied with your melee weapon count as hits, so you can keep up Osseous's 35% damage ramp pretty easily for the most part. As long as they're dotted up, you're basically always going to have it maxed out. And then for the weapons, it's also dealer's choice. Everyone knows I have an affinity for shotguns, and that's typically what I prefer, but in general, you're going to want corrosion, so either corrosive aura or hive cannon. I know, corrosion, fucking everything has to have corrosion. And your other mod should be some other support skill, either freeze or hunter's mark or song of swords, something like that. Since this is a melee focused build, you do tend to want to focus on buffing as much as your melee stuff as you can, so the ranged weapons themselves typically not going to be used all that often. Just pick something you're very comfortable with in case you need to use it while you're regenerating stamina. And like I said, there are tons of ways you can piece together melee builds. I'm just covering the setup as it focuses on leech and survivability through dots. It's effective at crowd control, and it's really strong against some of the larger bosses. It's not perfect though. It's not effective against things like, Tien, Obrick, Shroud, Gorfish, Harrow, Thrall, all the small humanoid enemies. But this setup carried me through my Help playthrough, and as I was just testing things, I really found myself going back to this build because it just provides an extreme amount of safety and some really solid damage. If you don't need the leech too, you can actually run Rusted Amulet, which is a really good choice for an amulet slot as well. It reduces the stamina cost of your abilities by 80%, so it lets you throw so many more sword beams out. The encumbrance could be an issue because you're basically always going to drop down to heavyweight, but there's ways around that. And I know I'm getting off topic, but you get the idea. There's so many ways you can craft melee builds, even this one specifically. But I just want to wrap this up. This is just one of my favorite builds running into the From Hell mod because it's just effective at pretty much everything. And the only real downside is that you're in melee range. But yeah, that's basically all for me. Thank you for watching and good luck out there, hunters.